My name is Tom Staley, and I'm the director of the Ransom Center, and I'm very pleased to welcome you tonight. I'm delighted to introduce my dear friend Bill Hobby, who's a deeply admired figure here in Texas. Bill has had a broad and distinguished career. He's most widely known as the longest-serving lieutenant governor in Texas, although long run in politics might not be the best thing right now. In 1989, during his final term in office, writers at Texas Monthly concluded, quote, Bill Hobby has had more effect on Texas government for a longer time with a better end result than anyone since Sam Houston. High praise. He has never cared about anything but what is best for Texas. He's run the Senate for 17 years without a hint of corruption, and he has brought Texas government into the modern age. What will we do without him? End of quote. Fortunately, for all of us, Bill has made innumerable other contributions to the state and its citizens in the years hence. He served as president of the Houston Post and chancellor of the University of Houston system. He and his wife Diana have remained strong supporters of higher education, astronomy, literature, the arts, and libraries to the great benefit of many of us. We're deeply grateful to them for all they've done for the Ransom Center. One of the most wonderful things about Bill Hobby is that he's a fine storyteller. I don't know if he's going to tell many stories tonight, but we can rest assured that his insights will be astute and prescient. With the census looming this year, I cannot imagine a more pertinent topic. I'm very pleased to welcome my friend Bill Hobby.
Tom, thank you for that introduction, understated as it was, but I still appreciate it. In just a few weeks, we're all going to be counted by the 23rd United States Census. Then the fun starts. Congress will reapportion. Texas will gain 3 or 4 seats in Congress and electoral votes in the next 3 presidential elections. Texas will also be eligible for billions of dollars more federal aid. Now, whether Governor Perry lets us collect that, of course, is another matter. If at first you don't succeed, don't try again. The legislature will redraw 232 districts, 36 congressional districts, 31 state senatorial districts, 150 House districts, and 15 State Board of Education. Then counties, cities, school boards will redraw thousands more. The most famous political cartoon in history, and do we have that?
Yeah, did you want it now? Can you get it now? There you go, Bill.
There we go. This is the most famous cartoon in American political history. It has added the word gerrymander to our language. The definition of gerrymander, incidentally, is very simple. I redistrict, you gerrymander. Okay, thank you. Gerrymandering, drawing a district to elect or defeat a particular candidate, is a time-honored technique practiced by the Founding Fathers, and it frequently doesn't work. The gerrymander shown in that, could you put that back up again? The gerrymander shown there occurred in Massachusetts in 1812. The Jeffersonian legislature tried to defeat an incumbent federal congressman by drawing a district that a cartoonist made look like a salamander. Elbridge Gerry was the governor, and hence the name. The Federalist won. The gerrymander didn't work. The very first gerrymander didn't work either. Patrick Henry, of course, opposed ratification of the Constitution, of which James Madison was one of the principal authors. In the Virginia Constitutional Convention, to consider ratification, Henry opposed, but Madison prevailed. And a good thing, or we might still be laboring under the Articles of Confederation, or we might not be a nation at all. But Patrick Henry prevailed in the legislature. He prevented Madison's election as one of Virginia's state senators. He then tried to prevent Madison's election to the House of Representatives by drawing an 8-county district thought to favor Madison's opponent, James Monroe. Madison won 1,308 to 972. Again, the gerrymander didn't work. Virginia was so rich in political talent that two future presidents actually ran against each other. Kind of makes you think of the Republican gubernatorial primary today, doesn't it? It's a good thing Madison was elected, else we might not have a Bill of Rights. Now, gerrymandering in Texas, as we all know, has had a delayed effect. Come on, guys. So onerous and contentious can redistricting be that legislatures for some years avoided it by creating statewide districts held by congressmen at large, that Congress prohibited at large and multi-member congressional districts in 1967. Texas amended the Constitution in 1951 to pass the Legislative Redistricting Board, which redistricts the legislature if the legislature fails to do so. Who here has served on the most LRBs? Bob Armstrong holds the record. He served, was it two or three?
Well, I don't know. We'll have to check.
I think McNeely says.
Three, but it may have been two.
Well, if you were only there for 12 years, it must have been two. But in 1981, I chaired the redistricting board, and no senators of either party seeking re-election were paired. I don't remember if the partisan balance was changed or not. In those happier days a generation ago, it didn't matter much. Now, of course, before redistricting comes apportionment. And apportionment can be fun, too. The first apportionment controversy, of course, was in the Constitutional Convention, where the Founding Fathers excluded 40% of the slaves from the apportionment base. The second was when George Washington cast the first ever presidential veto. He vetoed a bill. Actually, there's an apportionment in the Constitution, and this was the first bill passed after that. It was a bill favored by Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson, but opposed by Treasury Secretary Hamilton. I think that President Washington vetoed it because it gave New York too many votes. It'll surprise you that Hamilton was for it. In 1921, reapportionment was so controversial that Congress didn't do it at all. The 1920 census showed a large influx of immigrants and population shifts to the cities. Urban states would gain seats, and congressmen from rural states would have lost congressional seats. And of course, the shift within the states would have unseated even more congressmen, but they didn't reapportion because a lot of congressmen would have lost their jobs. So Congress ignored the Constitution for a decade. The House of Representatives became less representative. The country boys won again. Now, after the 1930 census, at the urging of President Hoover in his State of the Union, Congress changed the reapportionment procedure to make it more ministerial and self-enacting. Now, Congress decides who is counted and where, who excluded from apportionment, and what questions are asked. Should the census count government personnel overseas? Prison inmates serving time out of state? Should the census count Mormon missionaries serving God overseas? If so, where should they be included for apportionment? Well, sometimes government personnel overseas have been counted and sometimes not. But in 1986, Tom Foley from Washington succeeded Tip O'Neill from Massachusetts as Speaker of the House. In 1991, Congress included the overseas personnel, which had not been included in the census before, and thereby shifted a seat and an electoral vote from Massachusetts to Washington. Washington had, with that apportionment base, had 8,092 more citizens than Massachusetts. Now, would Massachusetts have lost the electoral vote to Washington, the seat and the vote, had Tip O'Neill still been Speaker? Go figure. Tip famously remarked, of course, that all politics is local. Inmates are counted where they are imprisoned rather than where they were convicted. Governors who export prisoners to other states, beware, you may be exporting a congressman. This has been a real issue. This has been a real issue, particularly in Wisconsin a few years ago. And who knows which of those prisoners is the congressman? Missionaries are not counted. After the last census, Utah sued unsuccessfully for a 4th congressional seat at the expense of North Carolina, contending that the Mormon missionaries serving overseas should be counted in the same way as government personnel. Actually, when you think about that, that idea might have some merit to it. Think how many congressmen Waco would have if they counted Baptist missionaries overseas. And so as the folks from Massachusetts, Washington, Utah, and North Carolina can tell you, those last few hundred can make a difference when you get down to a state's last seat. Frequently at redistricting conferences, and there's one coming up here in Austin soon, put on the National Conference of State Legislatures puts on these conferences all over the country about this season of the year, or about this season of the decade, I should say. But frequently a speaker will tell a story like this. When I redistricted, I think the guy I heard said Mississippi, in 1981, I drew compact districts with the lowest standard deviations in the Western world, but when I showed it to the speaker, he pointed out I had one too few districts. Now, that always gets a nervous laugh from the audience who are legislative staffers who are afraid they might do the same thing. But nothing like that could really happen, could it? Well, it did in Texas in 1922. The legislature left out Swisher County. The Supreme Court put it back in. Makes you wonder where the legislators from Swisher County were. Wars spawned censuses. Throughout history, military commanders have needed to know how many men followed their flag. Now, a rear march back through the centuries tells us that in the book of Numbers, appropriately enough, second book in the Old Testament, Jehovah told Moses to count the children of Israel as they wandered through the desert to see if they had enough soldiers to conquer the Canaanites. I always thought, it's kind of puzzling. You would have thought Jehovah would already know how many there were. But anyway, the census told the heavenly quartermaster how many to feed so that just enough manna fell from heaven. The census, incidentally, showed several million Israelites. The Israelites had an army of 603,550 soldiers. And as we know, although they'd been trekking through the desert for 40 years, they conquered. Censuses have been fatal. Moses threw the lepers identified in that census out of camp and left them to die in the wilderness. We celebrate the most famous fatal census every Christmas. It happened in Bethlehem either in the year 000 AD or 000 BC. I never can tell the difference. Even then, notice that they took the census in decennial years, ending in 0. Of course, Joseph and the pregnant Mary had gone to Bethlehem to be counted. There was no room at the inn, so they had to stay in the stable. Kind of like it was the Holiday Inn of that time. Records of that census survived until at least 150 AD. St. Justin Martyr wrote to the Roman emperor that Bethlehem is a village in the land of the Jews, 35 stadia from Jerusalem, in which Jesus Christ was born, as you can learn from the census returns. And one of the commentators on that noted that the census returns were no doubt preserved in the Roman archives and were probably accessible in Justin's day. But mindful of the prophecy that a rival king of the Jews would be born about that time in that place, Herod, of course, ordered the slaughter of all male infants so born. But, of course, Mary and Joseph escaped with their infant Jesus by retracing Moses' flight from Egypt. And despite Herod's murderous efforts, the prophecy came true. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, survived. As we all remember, Moses and Jesus were both hidden from rulers bent on infanticide. How different it would have been if the baby killers had found their targets. Now, celestial navigation was big in those days before the GPS that we have in our cars or cell phones, whatever. The Israelites, of course, were guided by a pillar of fire at night. And on that famous night in Bethlehem, some undocumented aliens, 3 guys on camels, were wandering around looking at the stars. And sure enough, they had drugs in their saddlebags called frankincense and myrrh. Another fatal census was taken in 1937 in the Soviet Union. The numbers were too low to suit Joseph Stalin, so he shot the members of the census board for diminishing the population of the Soviet Union. Somehow the census takers in 1939, 2 years later, somehow they found millions more Russians. It seems they had undercounts even then. And in the 1940s, census data helped Nazis find European Jews, with the results we're all familiar with. But let's get back to our census. It's an essential part of our electoral process. Right up there in Section 1, Article 2. The writers of the Constitution were creating a nation to be represented with an increasing number of states, with increasingly large populations, to be represented by an increasingly large Congress. Now, our census, like the numbers count, has been used for military purposes. In the Civil War, General Sherman used census maps to chart his march through the sea, march through Georgia. The maps, these were county by county maps, and they showed the number of whites, free blacks, slaves in each county. They also showed how the Army could live off the land, how many horses, mules, cattle, how much wheat, corn, oats, and other crops on each farm. General Sherman wrote to his daughter Ellen that no military expedition was ever based on sounder or surer data. He could move faster than his foes because he didn't need supply lines. Census figures helped Grant at Vicksburg just as they helped Moses in the desert. The 1940 census helped the Army to round up U.S. citizens of Japanese descent after Pearl Harbor in 1942. A friend of mine, Margot Anderson, Margot is the premier historian of the census right now. And one of the people that she interviewed in the course of her first book, she's working on now another huge history of the census, but probably the most cooperative subject of her interview was the Secretary of Commerce, who was Norman Y. Mineta, boss of the Census Bureau. He was an internee when he was a young man, and while he was in Congress, he passed a bill paying each surviving internee $20,000. So Secretary Mineta was very cooperative with Margot. And the 2000 census helped the FBI find Arab Americans after 9/11. Apportionment is as much about electing presidents as it is about electing Congress. The Constitutional Convention built in a small state bias in both processes by adopting the Connecticut Compromise. The Connecticut Compromise, of course, created our bicameral Congress, a Senate for the small states, a House of Representatives for the large states. Creating the Senate doesn't seem like a real good idea right now, but I guess they couldn't have passed the Constitution without that compromise. The Constitution apportions 3 electoral votes to each of the 50 states and the District of Columbia, regardless of size. Incidentally, historical trivia, Texas has never ratified the 23rd Amendment, giving 3 electoral votes to the district. This small state bias means, for example, that there are 3 times as many electors per resident of Washington, Vermont, and Alaska as there are of California, Texas, and New York. Now comes one of my favorite episodes in history, apportionment and Reconstruction. As you may recall, the North won the Civil War. Wait a minute. Well, the Northern Republicans, we won the Civil War, but you know, it doesn't feel like it. We still have a Southern president. But I'll tell you what, we're going to free the slaves. That's what war was about, right? We're going to free the slaves. Wait a minute. That puts that 40% back in the apportionment base. That gives the Rebs 16 more seats in Congress and 16 more electoral votes. It's enough to run the Capitol and the White House. That's what we put that 3/5 rule in the Constitution to prevent. Well, we'll fix that. Their efforts to do so were not impressive. The House, as we all know, impeached President Andrew Johnson for the high crime and misdemeanor of firing his Secretary of War without congressional approval. Cooler heads did prevail in the Senate by 1 vote. As we know from recent history, presidential impeachment is not one of the things that Republican Congresses do well. Well, we freed the slaves, but we're not going to give those rebs all those additional votes in Congress and electoral votes. So I'll tell you what, let's pass the 14th Amendment, which was a ludicrous attempt to deal with the threatened increase in Southern representation. Section 2 of the 14th Amendment gives Congress, the Northern Republicans figured quite correctly that those Southern states, they're not going to let those blacks vote. So, 14th Amendment says that if any state denies the vote to male citizens, meaning blacks, that their congressional representation would be reduced proportionately. Boy, that'll fix it, won't it? No. Southern states still didn't let the blacks vote. Neither did a lot of northern states either. So, well, we'll just forget about that. The Congressional Research Service, in fact, called Section 2 little more than an historical curiosity. Well, by God, we'll show them. So the Republicans passed the 15th Amendment, giving blacks and freed slaves the right to vote. And they probably regretted it ever since. For the last century, of course, they voted heavily Democratic. In any case, the amendment wasn't very effective until real enabling legislation came along. The Voting Rights Act, passed by a Democratic Congress at the urging of a Democratic president a century later. Oh, they also considered basing apportionment on voting population rather than total population. Well, voting population, of course, didn't include immigrants and women, and that would penalize the eastern states a lot. Well, that's back to the drawing board. In the end, the South neither gained nor lost representation for three reasons. Counting the freed blacks just about offset the Southern casualties during the Civil War. And the eastern states grew more slowly than the rest of the country and so lost a relative share. Western states, California, and believe it or not, the western states then included Iowa, Michigan, Minnesota, and Missouri. Those states grew by more than 50%, and so they got a lot more votes. And thirdly, the 1870 census was a mess. The South was undercounted by 1.25 million. And incidentally, the black undercount continues to this day. For example, in 1940, when Congress passed the draft, 13% more young black men registered for the draft than had been counted in the census in that age group. One man, one vote. That has a familiar ring to it, doesn't it? But it didn't until 1962, Baker versus Carr. The Supreme Court refused for years to hear redistricting cases because redistricting was a political issue, and that was a view strongly held and advocated by Justice Felix Frankfurter. Before Baker versus Carr, the redistricting fights, at least in southern states, were not between Democrats and Republicans. There weren't that many, but between city folks and country folks. And there weren't as many country folks as there used to be. The country folks won because their grandfathers had stacked the constitutional deck. And Baker v. Carr reshuffled that deck. Not long ago, the state constitution in Texas allowed Harris County, Houston, with almost 20% of the population, to have 3% won a state senator. Anyway, Baker won. One man, one vote became the law, and a wave of redistricting swept over state legislatures, city councils, school boards, and congressional districts soon reflected the new makeup of the legislature. Then came the Voting Rights Act. President Johnson urged passage of the Voting Rights Act with these words: "Rarely are we met with a challenge to the values and purposes of the meaning of our beloved nation. The issue of equal rights is plain. It's wrong, deadly wrong, to deny any of your fellow Americans the right to vote in this country." That act, of course, outlawed literacy tests and poll taxes. All you needed to vote was citizenship and a registration card. The 15th Amendment was finally to be enforced. The poll tax was eliminated by the 24th Amendment to the Texas Constitution, and the Texas legislature declined to ratify that amendment as recently as 2007. It's Rodney Ellis's bill. LBJ famously predicted when he signed the Voting Rights Act that he was signing away the South to the Republicans for a generation. He was wrong. It's now been almost 3 generations. Blacks and Hispanics became protected minorities. Congress, of course, renewed the Voting Rights Act in 2006. Now, blacks and Hispanics are protected, but not Democrats, men, Indians, and Asians. Thank goodness men are not protected minority, else we'd have district lines running through bedrooms. Up until 1990, redistricting was done in a prayerful attitude. Legislators and staffers spent a lot of time on their knees in the cathedral. The state capitol was the cathedral. Their prayer rug was a large state map with a plastic overlay, and a felt tip marker was the prayer stick, and a hand calculator was the rosary. Nowadays, it's all done on a computer. Move a precinct with a click, and the numbers displayed at the bottom of the screen of all the Voting Rights Act variables change before your eyes. Now, since the census determines how many electoral votes each state has, and therefore how much your vote counts, if you aren't counted, you don't count. Could I have that political atlas thing up there? This is just a brief little example of how you can use census data to analyze election returns. Okay. This is the Census Bureau map of Texas. Okay, next. Okay, thank you. Let me be sure I know how to run this thing. Okay, this is Texas politics and demography. This is county level data.
Speak into the mic, Bill.
Sorry?
The mic, we need the mic.
Oh, right. How's this?
Good, great.
Okay. It's county level data, and that's very important. You cannot, there's something called the ecological fallacy, which says that you can't infer individual behavior from county level data. Like, for example, median age in Harris County is 35 and I'm 78. It's something that people forget sometimes. This is the distribution of the by race of the voting age population. And again, this is obviously 2000 numbers. We'll get newer numbers soon. Whites are 57%, Hispanics about 29, blacks about 11, and Asians 2.8. For reasons we'll see in a minute, the Asian population is pretty interesting. In case you hadn't noticed, Texas is a rural state. Half of all Texans live in those 7 counties: Harris, Dallas, Bexar, Tarrant, Hidalgo. Now here's the same data displayed a little differently. Notice that over a quarter of the state, over a quarter of all Texans live in Harris County and Dallas County. And they're the counties in red. The counties in blue are the counties with over 1% of the state population. And I think that figure, I think it's over 25 million. I think the Census Bureau is saying over 25 million now. But so 1% is 250,000, and that means that the blue counties are the counties that have major metropolitan areas in them. Okay, here are the election returns by county for the last 3 presidential elections, and these are divided into quartiles, obviously. And anyway, I've used the traditional red and blue and so forth. Yeah, okay. This is Bush versus Kerry and McCain versus Obama. Now, here come the more interesting slides. This is the census data. Median age, and again, you can see the color code down there. The counties with the greatest median age are in red and so forth, down to blue with the lowest median age. And I want to flip back and forth between these slides for reasons. Okay, this is median income. The highest income counties, of course, are red. That's the Metroplex, the Austin, San Antonio area, Houston, Galveston, Beaumont. And here you see, and the next highest income, of course, are the suburban counties. And here you see what is increasingly people are calling the Texas Triangle. This is where most of the economic activity in the state goes on. Okay, here's the distribution by race. There's nothing here that you didn't know, but it's kind of interesting to see it displayed. The heavily Hispanic counties, of course, the heaviest counties, of course, are along the Rio Grande. The counties with the highest black percentage are in East Texas, no surprise there. Now here's what I think is interesting. The Asians, and I say they're 2.8, they're less than 3% of the population of the state, but look where they all are. They're in the research centers, and by that I mean centers with urban areas with research universities, medical centers, and so forth. And then on the barrier islands, Galveston, Brazoria, Matagorda, Aransas. These, of course, are Vietnamese fishermen. And then don't forget Fort Hood. That's those 2 counties. And that's Fort Hood, and that is children. If you haven't been to Killeen recently, as you walk down the main street, there are a lot of the stores have their names in kanji characters or other characters there. Now here's an interesting statistic. Registered voters divided by voting age population. About a fifth of all the counties in Texas have more registered voters than they do voting age population, or at least than they had VAP in 2000. The county with the highest percentage, you notice I pointed out the escapees in Polk County and the non-escapees in Walker County. What does that mean? Polk County is the highest because there's a trailer camp there called Rainbow's Inn. Rainbow's Inn, where owners of RVs all over the country, whether or not they register to vote in Polk County. And the county clerk mails the absentee ballots to Rainbow's Inn, and the people who register there, they keep Rainbow's Inn informed of where they are, and Rainbow's Inn forwards them the absentee ballots to wherever they are. So that's the highest percentage. Walker County is the lowest because there are 3 state prisons in Huntsville, and 25% of the voting age population have not escaped. And so, and again, just the voting data, of course, is 2008, and the population data is 2000. And this is interesting. This is by education percent with a bachelor's degree. And again, there's nothing there. The urban areas, of course, are red, with a few exceptions, which I'll point out in a minute. Okay, here are those with graduate degrees. And again, the urban areas are, they're in red, that's understandable. But gee, what in the world? Brewster County? They got their names of smart people in Brewster County?
Yeah.
That's Solo State College at Alpine. And of course here, that's the little, what's the name of that county? It's where that was A&M. And then of course that right there, that's natural, that's Stephen F. Austin. Graduate degrees, remember, by far most graduate degrees are professional degrees. Doctors, lawyers, preachers, veterinarians, so forth. So I'm just pointing out that all of those are not PhDs. Now here we get to some interesting points. Each of these dots in these scatter plots is a county. And the beauty of these scatter plot matrices are that you can show a whole bunch of variables, how they all relate at once. Look, for example, at the square that shows the relationship between the GOP percent and median income. There's a slight positive relationship there, not much. I'll get to that in a minute. It took me a long time to figure that out. Of course, strong relationship between percentage white and GOP vote, and a strong relationship between white and income. strong negative relation between Hispanic VAP and black VAP in the Republican percentage. Again, nothing very surprising here. Thing that jumps out at you is how linear, how well defined that relationship is. Well, you remember the map showing the Hispanic distribution by county? This is just a graphical representation of the same thing. Okay, here's GOP vote by income. The 7 counties on the left, those are the highest income counties in the state, and those, as you see, are suburbs of Dallas and Fort Worth, Austin, and Houston. No big surprise there. And the state median income is about $32,000. Okay, to sum up, counties get redder as age and income increase and population decreases. Now, the statistic I've used for population is the percentage of the state's population in each of these counties. You can use density, which works about the same. GOP percent goes down the more urban the area is. And those 2 lines are just 2 ways of saying the same thing. GOP percent, as you saw on that graph, peaks at about 32,000. Okay, for the math geeks here, this is the computer output that's underlying what I just showed on the last slide. Now this slide I have stolen from Steve Murdoch. Steve, whom many of you know, Steve was the state demographer for many years. Then he was director of the U.S. Census, and he's now teaching at Rice. Steve has used this slide to close his presentations for years, so I just stole it. I think he's a public employee. His work is, in the public domain. Any questions? Boy, I put them all to sleep.
At what age did the Democratic percentage peak?
Say it again.
At what age did the Democratic percentage peak?
Let's see, did I do that?
I'm talking about age income, annual income.
Oh, well, let's go back to that slide.
You said 33,000 Republican.
Yeah. Since my Y variable is the Republican percent, this graph doesn't show that. I could do one with the Democratic percent, but that's just not, that data is just not on this graph.
One of your stats showed $33,000 of annual income was a Republican stat. As income went up, they tended to go Democrat? I can't believe it.
No.
It was that slide before this, right?
No, I think this is the slide that you're talking about. Again, I presume, we all presume, that the higher income the individual, the more likely the individual is to vote Republican. But as you see from these maps, let's go back to this. Go back to the income map. What's happening is that, and incidentally, for the statisticians in the group, I was guilty of the ecological fallacy. Thought you could impute to individuals county level data. And I tried that income stat every way, and it still came up not significant. Well, that's because what's going on here is, okay, the higher income counties are also the urban counties. And the urban counties tend to be less Republican. Now, the suburban counties in yellow, anyway, the cities have higher median income than the boonies, big surprise. And the cities are also the more democratic parts of the state. But it took me God, I transformed that thing. I logged it and I square rooted it. And finally figured out what was happening. On the off chance that anybody would be interested in getting a copy of this lecture, can you put up that link? Or can I put it up? Or
We're going to get it, Bill.
okay. If not, Tom, you might put the link on your website, and then everybody could get it off of that. Okay.
I think it's better. Yeah, we'll do that.
Okay.
We'll put it on the website.
You remember that link I showed you before?
Yes, the one for Word document?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Word doc.
I could put it up here real quick.
Well, Bill, this has been interesting. Now, you've got to make one or two predictions, though, aren't you? I mean, what's going to happen?
Well, the only thing a political prediction tells you is that the prophet is a fool. So, you mean...
well, we're going to get 4 new additional members now.
Right, yeah. And they will, where exactly they will go, since I'm not a federal judge, I can't tell you. But obviously they'll go to the urban and more particularly the suburban areas.
Your question? Go ahead, Bill. There's a question out here.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
On the prediction front, I was actually wondering what you thought the probability was of Democrats taking back the House this year and how that would affect.
I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question?
When you're talking about predictions, I was wondering if you had any, predictions on the probability of Democrats taking back the House this year and then how that would affect redistricting in next year.
Can you hear?
Yeah. What's the probability that the Democrats will take back the state house? I yield to Dave McNeely.
Neely's here.
Yeah.
It's probably pretty slim, but it's possible.
Yeah, that's what I guess.
You heard it here.
Exactly.
About the same as becoming Asian.
About the same as what?
About the same as becoming Asian.
Well, it's not quite that small, I don't think, but
You haven't been around them, Bill.
One more question, anyway? Students? Bill, thanks.
thank you, Don.